something that I think of a lot when people are convinced that there is some conspiracy in science, or that there is some theory that everybody just accepts, but it might not really be true, is that scientists love nothing more than to discover something new, and that discovery could be proving wrong some well-believed theory. So there is literally zero incentive from a scientist's perspective to go along with some kind of conspiracy, to overlook evidence that says some well-accepted theory is wrong.
Well, it doesn't have to be a
Um,
conspiracy. I mean, it's happened many times in the history of science, right? That we thought something for sure was the case, and then it just
yeah,
wasn't.
and
Yeah.
then new observations come along and disprove it. That's science. That's how science works. That's how we make progress in the world, and that's why you do have to go back and look at your building blocks when you do get more information, because you learn, right?
Well, sometimes it's
Example I
luck
give in
also.
my class is that Newton had his ideas about the law of gravitation, right? It's wrong. Einstein's theory of general relativity is more correct. It's the most correct idea of how gravity works that we have now. But you wouldn't actually say that Newton was wrong or that he was an idiot. It's that his theory was incomplete, but it was pretty close at that time.
Overly simplified.
Sure. And it may turn out that there is something, more richer, more complex than Einstein's theory of general relativity that we haven't discovered yet, but we probably wouldn't go around saying Einstein was wrong or he was an idiot. It was just incomplete at that time.
But sometimes the observations aren't sufficient to, the data can stack up and you can keep tacking on epicycles and explain it with increasingly complex mathematics. And you can be completely wrong, but completely precise. And the observations can match very nicely, but you're still dead wrong. And
Yeah.
that's really fascinating element that doesn't necessarily involve precision, observation, mathematics, or anything of the like, because
Or a conspiracy.
or a conspiracy, yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
I think that dark matter seems to really fire people up about this, because it does seem like something that's undetectable and something that has been added to models.
Undetectable, but not yet detected.
Mm, mm.
Right. And so the question is, how long do you keep looking before you start? Because look, what you said about, every scientist wants to find something that will change the arc of the story that's being told is true. But there's also a very natural and to be expected conservatism in science, which demands that you don't knock the entire house down. Nobody wants the whole house to be knocked down, right? And so if there's a different reason for redshift, let's say, then you run into a problem where 100 years of science, of people basically being, we are absolutely dead certain that this is the case, gets unseated. And that's not it's not a conspiracy where people are getting together in dark rooms and they're like, we must prevent anyone from finding out that it's not the case. It's just a question of just not wanting to even think that maybe everything that you've believed your entire career and that you've taught people and that you've put into textbooks and everything else. It's because we know that cognitive dissonance is a problem, right? Like, you go and you look into any psychological research and it's writ large that people have a huge tendency to ignore facts that would shatter their belief structures. And scientists are people. They're disciplined and focused people, but
I freaking hate it when someone shatters my worldview. It's like the worst feeling ever.
it is absolutely the worst feeling ever, to the degree that I catch myself refusing regularly to look at things that would
It's hard.
challenge
Yeah,
it.
it's hard.
And so I guess it's like the fact that no one is studying that perhaps Redshift might have other components to it is alarming, because I'm like, isn't
Well, like,
that
for example, we were talking to this cosmologist in Canada yesterday.
John Moffat from the Perimeter Institute, which was a wild conversation because he's 90 years old and he's just been working in the field for his whole life.
I don't think he's unusual in that he is trying to come up with new models for the first few moments of the Big Bang that are able to account for some of this new data. I think that's probably a hot research area right now among cosmologists. But he's basically proposing, and I think others are too, that the basic physics at the early moments of the universe was different than the basic physics now. And that doesn't seem any crazier than the basic physics of light at great distances is different than it is in proximity or something like that. I'm not saying it's the case. I'm just like, it doesn't seem more crazy or less crazy. I mean, sorry.
Yeah.
Right, but I mean that's basically a hypothesis, right? You have a hypothesis that maybe light, something changes with light as it travels over distance, and so the way science would work is you'd have to design an experiment that could support or reject your hypothesis. And I would venture to guess that any experiment you could come up with would not support that hypothesis. And I don't think it's that scientists, like you said, we're people, we're trained to not let our minds hide potential truths from us, right? But we are people. But I think that particular aspect of Redshift is just something that seems so unlikely at this point based on all the observations.
Well, what's so crazy
to be wrong.
These are like such astronomical distances, right? I don't know how you do a tired light experiment on Earth or any. That's what's so bizarre about this. If you're talking about studying the first few instants of the universe, of all of existence, that's bound to be an interpretive science that relies on abstraction after abstraction of indirect evidence, because you can't do one of those in the lab. You're not going to just make a universe in your laboratory. And I think that maybe it's just such a like the idea of studying distance-related redshift in a laboratory is just mind-boggling. I mean, I guess you could use mirrors maybe or something, but still then it would be indirect, right? Then you're still making an artificial system that people will point to and be like, it's not quite
what is the closest object that has a redshift?
Yeah, how big of a laboratory do we need?
Beyond the local group, for sure. So Andromeda, the biggest, nearest galaxy to our own, is actually blue shifted because we're moving towards each other. So, on the order of probably 10 million light years or something like that.
That's a big laboratory.
But so I want to say about tired light, you guys had actually mentioned that in our pre-interview, and I'd wanted to read more and never got around to it. But like much smarter people than I am have spent time actually working on this and debunking this. And one interesting example that I did see when I was skimming some stuff about this is time dilation. So in our universe, things that are farther away from us because of the expansion of the universe, when you receive light from that object, you are observing, say you're looking at a light curve of something that changes with time. The time axis of that light curve gets stretched by the redshift. It's really 1 plus the redshift. So imagine there's some event that took 10 days in real time. You would observe it to take 100 days if it was coming to you from a redshift of 9, because the time axis gets multiplied by 1 plus 9. So
and this is just a consequence of general relativity.
Yes. And so if there was an object that was not truly that far away because tired light was real, and it was not redshifted due to the expansion of the universe, you would not see that time dilation. But we do see it, and supernova light curves are the easiest one because you can see those very distantly.
But what's so fascinating about that is it's a consequence of a theory that's our best, most precise theory of gravitation right now, right? But if we had like extrapolated Newton's theory, we might come up with things that didn't totally make sense also. And it would just be because we hadn't had a more precise description of that phenomena. And
evidence began to mount that something was wrong with our current cosmological theories. I think you would see more people look at it. And evidence is mounting in one particular area, and people are looking into it, which is the actual expansion rate itself. There's a tension between the expansion rate measured locally and the expansion rate you infer when you study the cosmic microwave background. It's known as the Hubble tension. And so people are trying to say, okay, maybe it's due to an issue with the observations, and plenty of people are working on that. And as time goes by, that has not yet been a conclusive answer. So people are trying to say, okay, how could I actually alter our best idea of how the universe works to accommodate that?